Hello, everybody. Welcome to the latest edition of the Royal Blue Podcast. My name is Joe Thomas. I am the Everton FC correspondent. Alongside me, I have our regular contributor, Gavin Buckland, who's also on Merseyside. And from the shores of Lake Geneva, we have Chris Beesley as well. Well, where do we go? I mean, it's Thursday lunchtime, Thursday just afternoon, as we say this, and it's been a very, very busy day for the Blues already. We spoke on Monday in the last podcast about how Everton don't do summer breaks and quiet periods over the summer. Well, today has been a massive, massive kind of example of that, with news coming in from all over the place, really. I think there's only one place that is appropriate to start, and that's probably on matters off the pitch, really, and that's with, as I'm sure most people will be aware of at the time they're listening to this, Dele Alli's interview with Gary Neville for the overlap with Sky. For so long, I think a lot of us have been wondering quite what has been the background to Dele Alli's difficult period on the football pitch. Obviously, such a golden talent who played a key role in getting Tottenham Hotspur to the Champions League final, England to the World Cup semi-final, and he's clearly struggled since then. Well, now we have some answers. Chris, I'm going to go to you, but I'll add the caveat for the listeners that obviously with you being in Lake Geneva, I know you've already been working around the squad today. Have you had much of a chance to listen or read what Dele's been saying?
I've seen what you've obviously written today, Joe, and so I've not seen the interview in full. As it were, and I know Everton have responded to it in regards to reply to Gary Neville's tweet. Who obviously Gary Neville was the one who interviewed him. I think we've known with Dele Alli that there's been problems that long predate his transfer to Everton, and like you say, Joe, it's been the $1 million question, hasn't it? Nobody's been able to sort of put their finger on it. Just what that might be. There's been lots of wild speculation of what it could be, and a lot of that rather been quite fanciful. But we know from a footballing point of view what a massive talent he was. I mean, see, I'm in this part of the world now, but the famous Swiss Football Observatory, who do all these sort of scientific measurements, only about 4 years ago, they rate him as the world's most valuable midfielder. And such a fall from grace, can't be explained in football terms. And, he should be at the peak of his powers now. I did a tweet earlier responding to your piece, Joe, and he's 27 years of age, should be absolutely in his peak years as a footballer, and instead, and now his career has drifted so much. So I suppose it sort of sheds light on what a tough situation he's been facing off the pitch, and kind of explains where that big dip has come from. It's a very tragic situation that the player faces, and unfortunately, I mean, given the constraints of the deal as well, which obviously brought him to Everton on a free transfer, but with the payments that kick in, it's difficult to see how he actually has a future at the club, even though he's been very glowing in the support that the club have actually offered him.
Well, I think it's interesting. I mean, obviously, this is a poignant reminder, one that we all need, and probably this is a very good time of the year to have it amid the transfer window and pre-seasons, when social media and speculation about everything kind of whips up into as frenzied as it ever is going to be. I think this is probably a poignant reminder, Gav, that there are far more important things in life than football, and that obviously the lens through which we view a lot of things is through football and what goes on the football pitch. But every single person who's out there involved in a beautiful game, just like us three, just like anybody that's listening, they all have their own personal issues to deal with. It doesn't matter who you are, how big a profile, how much money you've got. Seeking help, the first step to getting better is always the hardest one to make. And it's clear that it would have taken a hell of a lot of strength for Dele to have sought that help in the first place, and then also to speak to about it in the hope of inspiring others who may be struggling to try and seek help, and have the encouragement to seek out themselves, Gavin. I think that's probably what we need to take from this. Most importantly is that, number one, the most crucial element is the fact that Dele's now saying he's in a good place. That's the best piece of the whole interview. And number two, it's clearly would have taken a huge amount of strength for him to have opened up in the way he has, and he should be applauded for that.
Yeah, I mean, going back, your first point, Joe, I think is really important in all of this. is that Everton, as we know, is a club where people have attracted a lot of criticism and abuse over several years. And I think it's long forgotten that they're just people doing the jobs, aren't they, at the end of the day, however badly that you think they're doing them, or whether they should be there. And they're only people, and they have, everybody, as Dele Alli alluded to this, didn't he? Everybody is a person that they their own mental health to look after. And we should always remember that even on this podcast, we give people stick, the people they're just human beings, aren't they? And after their mental health well-being to look after. And we should always remember that. And it's only a game. And you know what? And that's what Dele Alli sort of showed today, didn't he? That there's far more important things and deeper things than just playing football. I've seen the interview. I know sort of there's long understand that his childhood possibly wasn't the best, but just think it's a miracle I become a professional footballer. It's just what a triumph that is. Never mind like playing for England and, as Chris said, being one of the top rated midfielders in the year. Just getting onto a football pitch at professional level, given his like background and that sort of childhood that you'd like to think that none of us on this pod would even begin to understand. And to do that, it was just incredible. I thought an incredible achievement. And then, as you say, I think then there's the other side of the coin. There is to come out and speak about it. And the thing is with Dele Alli, he's not the type. He has one image, doesn't he? I think, which he was talking about the party image and stuff like that. But he's obviously not like that at all. He's obviously a deep thinking, intelligent guy, and that's reflected in the way he plays football as well. And I think to come out and talk about such issues and such honesty in a public forum is, I think that's also a hell of an achievement as well. So good, best wishes for him for the future, and it's good to see that he says he's in a good place. But I think anything when you listen to him talk, it's like anything from now on, and it's a bit of a bonus, isn't it? As long as he's mentally right, he does stuff on the football pitch, that's fantastic. But that doesn't necessarily, if he doesn't, that doesn't necessarily mean he's failed. And I think it was a solitary reminder to us all about there's far more important things in life than football, and I think we should always remember that.
Another good element is to also bear in mind, I think, is, and obviously, there's been a lot of scrutiny around Everton over the last 18 months, last 6 months in particular, and we've spoken a lot about the issues at the club and things that there's a strong argument to suggest that where they have gone wrong. But one thing that does seem clear, and it's not just Dele's comments that come into my mind when I say this, but over the last 18 months, we've had Damari Gray, we've had Dominic Calvert-Lewin speak about similar issues and battles with social media and mental health. It feels like Everton, it's like Finch Farm, is a supportive place for players that are going through issues like this. And I think that's probably something that the club deserves for us to recognise as well. I mean, what do you think on that, Chris? Do you agree?
Yeah, definitely, Joe. Like you say, it's all too easy, isn't it? Unfortunately, to point out all the reasons, both on and off the pitch, why Everton in many ways have been at their lowest ever and has been such an easy target in recent years. But to be fair, and in Everton's defence, like say, Joe, this is one area where they've been really strong and one that should be applauded from those outside the club. Shouldn't sort of take it as a given that you're gonna. I mean, it'd be nice to think that you would, but such support in those kind of circumstances, and you'd like to believe that it's encouraging for the group there. I mean, so it's the phrase that Sean Dyche often uses, the group, doesn't it, when he talks about his squad of players, both players and staff. Then there is that support for one another. So yeah, at a time when the brickbats have been coming in various directions, Everton, and understandably so in many respects, because as I keep saying, saying worst equivalent point scorer in the club's history. I'll keep banging the drum on that one, certainly. But this is one area where Everton should be applauded, and Dele has said that himself, hasn't he? And that direct quote, and that she was very glowing in the support that he received from the club.
Well, we woke up this morning to Dele's, emotional and powerful interview with Sky on the overlap, and also lost in all of this is the fact that Frank Lampard has also been speaking as well in the diary of the CEO. Touches on his time at Everton rather than goes into any great detail. Gav, this is no slight whatsoever on you if you haven't seen this, because there's been a lot already. Have you seen any of his comments? Because if not, I'll just...
No, I haven't. Can I just... I think there's an important point, though, to be made about the Dele Alli position before you do, though, Joe. He's an employer has a legal responsibility in this instance for a certain amount of their employees' health and safety. So I don't go to see Everton doing stuff. They have a legal responsibility to do quite a lot of that as well. Obviously, what the club has done appears to be above and beyond what you would normally expect them to do by law. But in this, my employer has a certain responsibility in that area to me, and yours does to yourselves. So it's good to give the club credit, but it's always important in this instance. Remember, they also have a legal responsibility to do so as well.
Of course. Well, Frank Lampard's been speaking about more about his career in general, but also a little bit about Everton. I'm going to read through some of his quotes. So one of the things he does talk about is the squad. He goes, and this I think is a general point he's making about football, but I'll expand on it after we've done it. He goes, when you're working with a group, you have to be careful of that one, because not every player has your mentality. You either have to try and bring them up to the party, or if not, they're going to have to not be there if you're going to have success. You have 6 or 7 players where you know what you're going to get every day. They're going to train, come in and be active every day. You're going to have the middle group and the one saying, I'm just come to training, or I'm a bit sore today. The bar raisers can take some time to raise the bar, but the bar lowerers can get you very quickly. That negativity can slip in and be really contagious. In football, winning is everything. That is obviously relative to if you're Manchester City or Everton. Everton will win 35% of games at best at the moment, and you know that. You know there'll be 65% of weeks that aren't great. The bar lowerers can lower that quickly, whereas if you can get the bar raisers to take control, you can get there. I thought that was quite interesting comments, because I thought from speaking to people in and around the game, one of the things post-Lampard that got the impression was almost backed up by that point where it felt like he had a core group of players that he trusted and put a lot of faith in, and perhaps had difficulty in bringing up the others to either the standards that he required, and sometimes that perhaps meant leaving them out or ostracizing them as opposed to perhaps getting them feeling involved. So obviously we know we had the likes of Connor Cody and James Tarkowski, who he clearly trusted and valued, but we also know he had issues with some of the other players, most notably perhaps Abdoulaye Doucouré. And obviously he doesn't mention names or anything like that, but I thought it was quite interesting to read that, because we know that they fell out towards the end of his time, but we also know from what we saw under Sean Dyche, who brought Doucouré back into the fold, so Doucouré probably ended up being the most influential person in Everton's eventual survival from the Premier League. When you read or listen to those comments, Chris, I mean, what do you think they offer any real insight into Lampard's time at Everton, or do you think it's just obvious that he's there with a group of players that we've spoken about it being a Frankenstein squad of other people's ideas for the most part? I mean, do you think that it was inevitable that he would always struggle with the squad that he's got, or do you think that there's perhaps a failure or narrowness of mindset that he failed to kind of get the most out of some of those fringe players?
It was interesting. Obviously, you mentioned Abdoulaye Doucouré there, Joe, because he was obviously the one who was dropped in the last days of Lampard. And interestingly, obviously, I've been up at the team hotel earlier, and I'm going back there later today. And in between my interviews, I actually saw Abdoulaye Doucouré in and around the grounds, and he was talking to a family of they weren't Evertonians, but they were football fans, and it was having a lovely conversation with them, and seemed, he seemed like a model professional. I mean, it's not like somebody has to be right, somebody has to be wrong in this one, and somebody's good, somebody's bad. Players and managers do fall out all the time. But I'm not sure if Abdoulaye Doucouré could necessarily be deemed one of those, nor does Frank actually say that he was. But in terms of Frank Lampard and his time at Everton, perhaps Frank tried to be too idealistic. We all know he's a very hugely popular man in the whole, maybe not with Doucouré, but the way he conducted himself and the way he went about himself. But ultimately, it's a results-based business, and Frank knows that more than anyone. He's possibly one of the greatest English midfielders of the Premier League era, a serial winner with Chelsea. Many at Stamford Bridge consider him to be their greatest ever player, but he came to Everton with a sort of... it's hard to gauge just how good he'd been as a manager from his time at Derby County and Chelsea, and I suppose Everton was the acid test with that. And ultimately he failed, came in very difficult circumstances, a club that was divided after Rafael Benitez's time there. Obviously got them over the line just in that first season. But to make no bones about it, Everton were heading for their first relegation in 72 years under Frank Lampard. And maybe it's because, there've been much greater managers than him who'd struggled. As ironically, the great Carlo Ancelotti of all people went to Real Madrid on the back of a spell at Everton where if he'd been anyone other than the great Carlo, he'd have been called into question for that last season at Everton. So that shows you just how tough the job is. Yeah, I think it's difficult. I mean, Frank's trying to sort of say his piece now, isn't he? And like you say, he's reflecting back on a more sort of general piece about his life and times in football. But you only have to look at, again, difficult circumstances. But look what happened when he went to Chelsea after his spell at Everton. He hardly covered himself in glory there, didn't he? I think if anything, if Frank had sort of left Everton a bit earlier in the season and gone to Chelsea a bit earlier in the season, it may... bizarrely, even Chelsea might have been dragged into that relegation fight. So yeah, Frank Lampard, lovely man, one of the greatest midfielders this country's ever produced, but not sure where he goes next in his managerial career, unless maybe the Saudis might offer him some big bucks so he can go Joe Stevie in the desert.
Thanks for that, Chris. Someone put 50 pence in you, 50 Swiss francs in you there, I think, and maybe been on your Toblerone. Frank Lampard also said, and this is quite interesting, the most important person at a club is, in my opinion, the owner. It's about the structure at the top as they set the tone financially and on recruitment. You will only be as good as the players you recruit. When I finished my first season at Everton, we stayed up by the skin of our teeth, and Mashiri rang me to say congratulations, but Frank, don't rest. 80% of your work for next season will be done in the next month. It was recruitment. 20% will be what you do next year, and 80% will be bringing in the right players. Now, Gav, for all that Chris has said there about the questions that I think is fair to ask about Lampard's managerial ability, the counter argument to that is obviously also, and there's also some validity in it, the fact that Everton is and has been for quite a while probably a perfect storm of problems for a manager to enter and get to. And I think Chris mentioned there that Lampard failed as a manager. Well, he obviously succeeded in his first task and quite emphatically at keeping Everton up. Managed to do that, and the bonus being that he seems to kind of get Everton healthy in days now to a point where it felt like there was a lot more unity between, say, parts of the club and parts of the fan base. We know what's happened since. Now, there's no way that you can look back at Lampard's second season, as it were, or what there was of it, and say that was a success at Everton. Obviously, I think Chris is right. I think Everton were heading down. As far as you could predict these things, when he left in January, there was only one place Everton were going. But does that not perhaps give you some insight into the difficulties of the job that he's had, and maybe the fact that his hands were tied when Everton it stayed up, just stayed up? But like he says, by the skin of the teeth, the owner rings up, says 80% of the work for next season is going to be done in the next month recruitment. Well, we all know what happened in the next month. They sold Richarlison. They brought James Tarkowski in at free. They didn't do a hell of a lot more until a bit later on in the transfer window.
Yeah, I was just thinking, from the two sets of quotes you've given so far. So Frank's blamed the players, now he's blaming the owner then, isn't he? And I disagree with what he says about the owner being the most important person at the football club. Most important person at the football club has and always will be the manager. And I think that we should remember that. I think Frank also I'm not like defenestrating Frank here. I think he didn't walk into a situation that should have been a surprise. He probably knew what the squad was like. I mean, if he don't have to go on social media for a day before he took the job to see what Machiri was like. So none of this was a surprise to him. And he's also been in the game long enough, as Chris was saying, and as team player, to know that, you don't do 80% of your work in the summer, do you? As a club. I mean, come on. Recruitment's important, but you don't just say, we've recruited well this summer, and, so we can all, we know go on holiday that for 6 months. It's the hard work is in the season, the winning games, and going back to what he was saying about players. There's some players. What did he say? Ball lowerers or something. Well, Frank, you're being paid like X millions of pounds a year to get them to hire the bar again, aren't you? And those comments with there's some stuff he said after the games where you think, well, actually, you've not done your job properly there, Frank, but he's sort of inferred or explicitly blamed the players. And these two sets of comments are in keeping with his psyche, I think. That said, I haven't got the bad stuff out the way. I think, he was dealt some bad cards, but he knew that. I think he did just about well enough in the first season to keep us up. I think he would also as well, he did bring a collectiveness, didn't he, to the fan base, the players and stuff like that, because you can associate with them. He was good with the media. He was good with, as a sort of raise the profile of Everton. And so I did have a problem with him last summer, but to me the problem was this season, wasn't it? Just gone. I mean, woeful, really woeful management performance. I would say, the stats bear that out. Was it 3 wins in 20 games or whatever it was, and some heavy defeats in that time, poor performances. So I think, as much as I think his first half of his career was manageable and acceptable, I failed to see some of the, the positives of last season. Even allowing for some tough luck with injuries on occasions. Calvert-Lewin being, say, a prime example of that. But it just seems, it sounds like an interesting interview, but and obviously there's only like highlight some bits, but that's what I'm keeping with my impression of Frank when he was the manager here, is that on occasions it appears to be everybody else's fault but him. And so I'm not surprised in that context, and nothing's happened to Chelsea, has it, to improve, to change that view. And it is difficult to see where he goes now. Obviously Chris is acting as his de facto agent here, putting that out there. But only, and you are closer to the Middle East than us, Chris. In that direction. This is like going back many years ago. I'm going off on a complete tangent here. If you before your time, Chris, you probably remember when John Revie went to manage in the Middle East in the 70s.
Oh yeah, after his England.
He went via Switzerland, okay. And so it's obviously a stop-off point that's been well trodden. But yeah, I think Frank's statements, they're not surprising. And I don't say Machiri's not been an issue, but he's got to look at himself as well, hasn't he, surely?
Thanks, Gav. Right, so we've covered Dele, we've covered Frank. Now we're going to move on to Ashley Young. We're speaking at 2:30 here. 3 hours ago, Ashley Young was confirmed as an Aston Villa player. Gav, I'm going to confirmed as an Everton player. Obviously, trying to juggle too many things here. So much going on today. I'm going to come back to you, Gav, because my next question is going to come to Chris. I think we covered Ashley Young a lot on Monday, didn't we? So I don't think we really need to kind of go into too much depth on this. But obviously, they got the deal over the line. It's quite interesting. One of the things you said just then when talking about Frank Lampard was about his role in raising the profile of Everton. Because obviously he was an international. They, I went out to Australia, went out to America with Everton whilst Frank Lampard was in charge. And, for all the crowds that were there for Everton fans, it was clear there's also a significant number of people there that were either football fans, Chelsea fans, or general Premier League fans in both countries that wanted to get a bit of taste of Frank Lampard because of, his personality and his profile. I think one of the things that was quite interesting last summer was the idea that Frank Lampard was clearly a pull to the players that did come to Everton. And going into this summer, I think there would have been question marks as to whether or not Sean Dyche could have replicated that. Obviously, we know he's not of the same kind of magnitude of profile as someone like Frank Lampard. It is clear, however, that he has played a big role in Everton's first recruit, in Ashley Young. Ashley Young spoken highly of him, but though from speaking to people close to Ashley, he genuinely thinks a lot of Sean Dyche. And Sean Dyche is quite complimentary of him in his remarks as well from the signing announcement. Obviously, Sean Dyche was captain of the Watford side that Ashley Young made his burst onto the scene at. We're not a lot further in terms of what we already knew because it was probably Everton's worst kept secret that Young was coming in through the door before today, Gav. But nice to finally have a signing over the line, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, I think the general consensus, contrary to what people maybe I believed at the start that, this would be a divisive transfer is, I think most people I've spoken to said this makes a lot of sense. I think when it was first announced, people were saying, I'm quite understandably so. But since then, when people have realised how many games he played for Aston Villa, that he's only been injured, was it twice, been out for twice in 7 years or something, one of them was COVID, I think. Seeing in his versatility, seeing the reaction to Aston Villa fans, finding out he's leaving and saying that he's wanted him to stay. And I think that it's been said that there's people in the Villa hierarchy wants them to stay. I think we're looking at a difference actually Young now, are we, compared to what we were doing, say, a week ago in terms of what he can do for us. And basically everybody I've spoken to thinks it's a good signing and will give us some much needed versatility. And it's just interesting, isn't it, really? I was thinking that he didn't replace Lucas Dean at left back.
He kind of covered and competed for him with him, yeah.
So he's now competing with Michalenko, who sort of replaced Lucas Dean at sort of left back. He's sort of like, there's a circle there, isn't it? I think it's a good sign, and it's obviously a good pro. I think it's interesting going back about Dyche, is that it's just, I think he would be attractive because for some players, it depends what your personality is, I suppose. And this is something like what Frank was maybe talking about, is, like the bar lowerers. If you were a bar lowerer and you knew you were, but actually you knew you wanted to do well, but you didn't have it in your personality to sort of be, I don't know, be professional or whatever. Wouldn't you want to work for Dyche? Because he'd be on you all the time.
Yeah, quite possibly.
Yeah, it's what you want from a manager, isn't it? Yeah. And I can see quite a few players who perhaps all players need direction and instruction. I could see why you'd want to work for Dyche, because you know that's what you're going to get, don't you? But you get with a manager who'll just leave it up. And I think you get the impression that Frank has been really talented player who would expect you to do stuff. Where with Dyche, I think, if I was a certain type of player, I would want to work for him because I know he's going to instill discipline. He's going to tell me what to do. He's going to get me fit. All that type of stuff. And I think we underestimate that in him, don't we? Really, because we need to remember that there are players actually. That's what they want from a manager.
Ashley Young appreciates Dyche's earthy honesty. His approach to football, and it's clear that Dyche does have a very different approach to football than someone like, say, a Frank Lampard, or a lot of kind of the more modern personalities. He seems to somehow remain calm amidst the maelstrom of just what is top flight football these days. We have 24-hour rolling news. We have social media. There's a constant demand for answers and gratification and signs of progress and positivity. And Dyche seems somebody from the limited experience that I've dealing with him, obviously the last 4 years since he joined at the back end of January. He seems somebody that is very capable of putting all that to one side and focusing on what actually matters. And it will be interesting because that's a different type of personality compared to the other managers that have tried that managed Dele Alli since the good days of under Pochettino, and maybe that might be the kind of, it might be that level of protectiveness and sure-footedness that helps Dele relight his career as well. I don't think there's any need to talk anymore about Ashley Young, but so we'll move on to other transfer news. And this is what I want to come to you for, Chris. Player that was, he was definitely a target of Everton's in January, and then I wrote some stuff last month about the possibility of a move and the fact that he was clearly available should Everton want to go for him again this summer. And that's Anthony Elanga. It sounds like there's a little bit of momentum growing behind that as an option now, Chris. Now, we know he's on their radar because he was in January. Yeah. And although Dyche is no longer in charge, Elanga is still a profile of player that Everton desperately need. We know the people behind the scenes who have remained the same. Obviously liked him then, and they'll surely like him now. And he's clearly available. Now, do you want to just let us know, obviously you're there with the camp, you're speaking to people, just precisely on Thursday afternoon, just where we are with Anthony Elanga?
Yeah, there were obviously reports earlier today, which has since been amended, the BBC, that a bid somewhere between 15 to 20 million have been submitted. Now, I understand that's not the case. And like I said, the BBC have changed their article since then. Yeah, he remains a player of interest for Everton. As you say, Joe, he is somebody who's been on their radar with Director of Football Kevin Felwell for a number of months now. There was a possibility it could have been done in January, like all those other January deals. It didn't get done. It remains to be seen whether Everton is willing to meet United's asking price, because although he is very much, like you say, Joe, he's available for transfer. I don't think anyone's disputing that. Whether Everton are good, at a time when we understand funds are tight at Goodison Park, are they really going to do an outlay of that kind of money on a player who obviously Sweden international, very much promising prospect for the future, but very much still a work in progress. It's similar in a way to Dwight McNeil before he came to the club. Much maligned for that last season at Burnley, ended in relegation. He didn't score a single goal, but then he ended up coming to Everton and finishing top scorer, albeit a very low scoring Everton team, but 7 goals last season from McNeil. Obviously, we had the piece with him this morning. 5 of those came since Dyche came to the club. So you wonder whether somebody like Elanga could sort of replicate that sort of trajectory in that, he failed to score for Manchester United last season. But yeah, as things stand, I'm told he's just one of a number of targets being considered at the moment, because obviously there's a lot of names in and around the place, and I'm sure we need no reminder just to who they are. Similar sort of profile players, but it's obvious to everyone. We've seen since the start of summer that attacking options have got to be the priority for Everton, and a couple of new faces in that department are required for the start of the season.
Absolutely. I think that Elanga is just someone that's clearly available. I think some of the numbers that are being quoted by those reports today, I think they include clauses and additional things if he meets them, it would trigger extra payments and things like that. I don't think he'd require 15 to 20 million pound up front or anything like that. I think it'd be far cheaper in terms of initial outlay. The only issue there for Everton being probably not necessarily expensive to whether they can afford him, but whether or not they end up in a bidding war with someone that could drive the price up. There's reports in Nottingham Forest are interested in him. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure how substantial that is, but obviously the last thing Everton would want to do is end up in a situation where the price is getting pushed up and up. Chris, you mentioned that people be well aware of some of the other names. Obviously, we know the Wilfred Gnonto, Leeds is one of them. There were reports in Italy this week that a deal had already been done and was signed off. Mm-hmm. We've also understand not to quite be the case. From a Leeds perspective, Gnonto is very much still their player. He's got another 4 years left on his contract. even though they got relegated, they considered him to be on an affordable wage. And on the surface level, at least from the conversation I've been having with people around Leeds, they very much see him as their player, and they want to keep hold of him. So the impression I get with Nonso is not that a deal couldn't be done, but I think if anyone was to prize him away from Leeds, I think they'll be made to work hard for it. And as we've covered with Everton, it's not clear whether or not they'd have the funds to end up in a situation where they can be really proactive on a player like that. A couple of others was Tom Heaton's been mentioned, the Manchester United goalkeeper that used to work with Dyche at Burnley. Obviously, again, we spent a lot of time talking about this on the podcast. The departure of Asmir Begovic has left quite a significant drop-off, I think it's fair to say, between what we know Jordan Pickford can do and what we know João Virginia or Andy Lonergan could do. That's not to say that they couldn't do an exceptional job. We just haven't seen much of them. I think Heaton is a player that you could see fitting in that Everton squad. But the minute Manchester United's goalkeeping department is a mess, all the noises over there is they're not going to be letting him leave while they try and sort out the aftermath of the David De Gea situation. And I also think that Tom Heaton's quite keen if he does leave to get first-team football, which he obviously wouldn't get at Everton. But whether or not something can get sorted out remains to be seen. But I think that'll be something that'll be dealt with much later in the transfer window. Gav, when it comes to Elanga, I mean, it's the type of player that Everton need. Obviously, he's attacking player, he's winger. He came onto the scene, in positive fashion. Manchester United had a difficult season last season. Obviously, they kept him in and around the squad throughout the year, but his difficulties, I think, were obviously he started the season when Ronaldo was still there. He started the season with a couple of games in Manchester United spending big money on Anthony and having signed Jadon Sancho. So he was always going to struggle a little bit there with the money that was spent on players that can play in similar positions to him. And obviously beneath him, he was probably undercut by the rise of Garnacho as well, who obviously had a meteoric rise last season. But I think it's fair to say that we've seen he has a little bit of potential. I mean, is this the type of player, again, like Chris says, perhaps a bit like Dwight McNeil, that Everton can probably target this year, in the sense that you have the sense that there's potential there, but you might be getting them at a bit of almost the lowest ebb in their senior career because they're coming off the back of a bad season, which might not actually be the bad season might not have been anything to do with them and their own contribution. It's just, as I kind of just explained and touched upon, the factors that are going on around them.
Yeah, I know, absolutely. There's loads of players, isn't it, over the time who can be bought and turned out to be great players, and you can get them on the team. I'm not saying Elanga's going to be a great player, but yeah, I think you can take advantage of that. I mean, he'll probably give us something that he was quite patient, isn't he, and stuff. I think he's a decent prospect. I think it boils down to, without going on, we spoke at length, didn't we, on Monday about money and cash, and we don't need to go down that line. I think a lot of this will probably be the fee and whether we can pay in instalments and so on. Perhaps will be the issue here. And also as well, what does that mean to other members of the first team squad as well? I possibly has been murmuring about a Wolves in the last few days, and I think if he comes, I could see a Gray or a Wolves going up, possibly both. No, always a different role, but in terms of like the cash difference, Yeah,
another point there I've been linked to. He's our colleague Conor O'Neill wrote the other day, open to move to Everton. I think he's considered his option. That's Arno Danjuma, who obviously made that dramatic U-turn in January. It doesn't seem to be that there's any bad blood between Everton and him. So I think he's another one that all of a sudden there's a few options there that look relatively affordable. I think the issue with Danjuma again would be not what happened in January or whether he wants to come. Any stumbling block for him would probably be, I imagine everyone could be able to get him on loan, but it would depend if there's an obligation and how much that obligation would be. Because I think if those figures got big, that might end up putting Everton off. But all of a sudden, there does seem to be movement, and that's a positive thing. Obviously, we know Everton need the players. Chris, I mean, on a normal normal podcast, we keep saying about how normal it is for things to not be normal at Everton. I mean, really, we should have started by going big on how you are there on the lake shores of Lake Geneva in the sunshine, and the lightning bolts from, that Sean Dyche looks completely nonplussed around. But, can't labour this enough. You're obviously one of the few reporters out there covering the training camp. I think you're probably going to be the only UK journalist out there covering the game on Friday. What's it like? Can you tell us a little bit about the camp and, what you've seen of the situation so far, the atmosphere, how you find it out there?
Yeah, I mean, look like I'm about to merge into this curtain here. The camouflage there. Yeah, I'm not at liberty to divulge too much about their actual surroundings there, but safe to say it's rather more plush than what I am. But yeah, I was speaking to Steve Stone earlier, the first team coach, and there's a piece coming up with him later on. But he was saying he really liked the surroundings there that they're in. Obviously, Dyche's been in the area previously with Burnley, and he thinks it's a really good base that they've got there. The players they're happy, they're occupied. It's not one of those where they're climbing up the walls because there's nothing for them to do. I know there's been a lot of sort of fun and games around the place. It's not just hard work. We take that as a given with Sean Dyche and his team that this time of year is going to be the hard grafting and the work on the fitness, albeit as Dwight McNeil pointed out to us, Gaffer's Day isn't until next week when they're back at Finch Farm. So they've been spared that at the altitude that we're at, although they have been getting on the bikes to train in. And Dwight pointed out it's the first time in a number of years he's been on the bike. So obviously no BMXs for him for a while, but he's back in the saddle. And I think fun and games around the Gaff saw them playing a bit of mini golf earlier, bit of rackets, which I wasn't aware of. It's some sort of mini tennis kind of racket game I'm told is big on the continent. So there's plenty for them to do in and around the area. And as like I said, the worst thing is if the players are bored and not enjoying themselves. It doesn't seem to be like that at all. They do seem to be embracing it. I think the timing is just right. It's not too long. It's just out here for the week. And then, as we say, the friendly tomorrow evening now at the home of UEFA. Obviously, the ground isn't at the home of UEFA, but in Nyon, the town where UEFA's headquarters are, where they take on newly promoted Swiss second tier side Stade Nyonnais. So I believe I'm the only one out there, so you can follow that on the Echo blog tomorrow, and there'll be various updates from that.
Fantastic. Well, we'll leave things there, but great to get that insight from you, Chris, and look forward on Monday to be able to hear about more of your experiences, and look forward to reading some of your exclusive concepts. We had Dwight McNeil this morning, we've got Steve Stone to come, and I'm sure a couple of others as well. Well, we tried our best there to sum up what's been quite an interesting day, to say the least, for Everton. I think we all need a little bit of time to decompress after this, but I'm sure the news will just carry on coming. Even if the news doesn't carry on coming, as Chris referred to there, we have Everton's first pre-season fixture, the game against Stade Nyonnais on Friday evening. We will, of course, have live coverage from that match and plenty of reaction as well. So keep an eye out on our social media and on the website and on the app as well. We've been the Royal Blue Podcast. Thank you ever so much for joining us, and we will speak to you again on Monday. Thank you.